Hi, beautiful people. Welcome to the Fort Salem Library, where we read you your fanfiction. So sit down or don't, relax or don't, and enjoy these stories in a way you have not before. We at Fort Salem Library do not own Motherland Fort Salem or any of the related characters. The Motherland Fort Salem series is created by Elliot Lawrence and owned by Freeform. This story is a work of fanfiction and is meant for entertainment only. We are not making any profit from these stories. All rights of the original Motherland Fort Salem story belong to Freeform. We also do not own All That Remains or any of its original characters and storylines. We did, however, get permission from the author to read their story. This story was created and written by TrueFreak89, and you can find a link in our show notes. This story is being read to you by Angela.
All That Remains, Chapter 8. When Telly volunteered to tell Scylla that Rael was okay, she forgot one important detail, to ask Rael which dorm they had signed the newcomer to. After walking up and down the corridor containing the family dorms twice and not spotting Scylla's name on any of the doors, Telly resorted to desperate measures. She pulled a scrying stone out of her pocket and used it to peer inside the dorms for any sign of the other girl. The majority of the dorms were empty. It was a weekday and most people had jobs to go to, while the children had school. After knocking on a few wrong doors, she finally found Scylla. The new girl opened the door with trepidation, only opening it all the way when she realized it was Telly. "Hey," Scylla greeted the other witch, smoothing over her apprehension with an amiable smile while she relaxed against the doorframe with one hand tucked into her pocket. Telly wasn't so easily fooled by her attempt to look at ease. She could practically feel the tension coming off Scylla in waves. "How's Rael?" "She's awake," answered Telly. "The horde have passed, and so, well, she's herself again." "Can I see her?" Scylla interjected, eager to see the other girl again. It was early afternoon, and if the horde had passed, and she could see for herself that Rael was okay, Scylla could take off and put some distance between her and the Iron Mountain before nightfall. "She is, but she can't have visitors yet." "Orders." Telly gave a small shrug and an apologetic smile. Scylla couldn't picture the sweet girl in front of her in battle against anyone, let alone the Spree or the Camarilla. Like Rael, she seemed to be another victim of order and conscription. Rael's sister-in-arms appeared eager to please. She'd be easier to get information from without the bellwether girl around. Scylla felt a brief pang of guilt for exploiting Telly's kind nature, but it was fleeting. She put on her best charm offensive, eyes wide and full of concern as she reached out and placed a hand on Telly's arm. "What's going on with her? How can she be infected and still be human?" she asked, letting her voice wobble a little bit in the middle. It didn't quite do a trick. Scylla saw the uncertainty in Telly's big brown eyes, so she pushed harder. "Please, Telly." "Well, it's not really my place." Telly bit the inside of her cheek, wringing her fingers together as she wrestled with some kind of internal conflict. With a look over her shoulder at the empty corridor, Telly took a step into the room and closed the door behind her before she relented and said, "Rael healed someone who was bitten. That's how she got infected." "That's not possible," Scylla frowned. She'd heard of people trying to link with the infected to heal them. All of them had failed, resulting in the fixers becoming infected themselves, even when the infected hadn't turned yet. The result was always the same. "Unless she doesn't use canon." It was a stretch, but Rael's unorthodox work was all Scylla could think of to explain why her exposure to the infection hadn't resulted in her turning into a freaker. "That's the leading theory," Telly agreed, no longer seeming quite so worried about telling Scylla too much. Scylla felt a thrill of vindication at being right about the other girl. "It's the only one, really. No one can explain how else she could be infected and still be human." A grave thought that had been tickling at the back of Scylla's skull finally surfaced. "We kissed," she trailed off, struggling to find the words to voice her concern. Thankfully, Tally picked up on her unease almost at once. "She's infected, but she's not infectious," she explained. "Abigail and I found that out the hard way the first time a horde came by after she was infected. She bit both of us before we took her down." "What happened?" "Nothing," Tally shrugged. "Our blood test came back clean. You weren't infected, so you don't have to worry about any of Rael's bodily fluids infecting you. She's totally clean. Squeaky clean, in fact." "Good to hear," Scylla laughed, grinning at the other girl's enthusiasm. If Tally had a tail, it would be wagging. "So, when can I see her?" "Maybe tonight," Tally suggested. "I know a great way to pass the time, though. There's a garden some of us are working on up top. It's small, but it's safe." Sure." Scylla had nothing else to do. If she couldn't check on Rael until later, she'd be spending the night at the base and slipping out at first light. Tally took Scylla up to the surface and let her out of a side door instead of the main entrance. It opened out onto a fenced-in patch of land the size of a football field. Tally explained it had previously been a parking lot for military vehicles. "We tore up the concrete and our necrostrated the earth to make it fertile. We're trying to grow wheat and vegetables, and we even have a few fruit trees. Just apples, oranges, and lemons so far." Scylla nodded, taking it all in as Tally led her down a path towards one of the many greenhouses. She recognized most of what was growing and knew the necros at the base had to be responsible. Things like strawberries and potatoes didn't grow in October in Massachusetts. It was an impressive setup. Scylla could see they were trying to put down roots and planning on staying at the base long term. Scylla had never stayed in one place long enough to put down roots. Life as Dodger meant she was always on the run. Her time at Fort Salem was the longest she'd spent anywhere. She'd gone on the run again after going AWOL from the military, returning to her old ways and moving between spree cells and Dodger circles alike. Do you have any gardening experience?" Tally asked, drawing the other girl out of her thoughts. "Some," said Scylla, biting back a smirk. She wasn't about to share that she was a necro. As nice as Tally seemed, she was still military. Inside of the greenhouse was much hotter than Scylla expected for a dreary October afternoon. There was a dark-haired young man tending to the various herbs growing inside. He smiled warmly at Tally as he turned and caught sight of the two women. He had kind eyes. That was the first thing Scylla noticed about him. "Hello, Tally." He removed the gardening gloves he was wearing and wiped at the sweat on his brow with the back of his hand. "Hey, Adil. This is Scylla. She's the one who saved Ray." Tally introduced the two. Rael had shared her concerns the night before that Scylla might have had a bad experience with other survivors, and Tally wanted to show her how safe and welcoming the base could be. And Adil in the garden seemed like the perfect place to start. Adil's eyes lit up as he stepped forward and offered Scylla his hand. "Thank you, Scylla. Rael is a good friend and very special to me." Something in Scylla's expression must have betrayed her surprise, because Adil quickly elaborated with an apologetic smile. "Not in that way. She saved my sister when no one else could. Rael is a gifted healer." "She's something," Scylla agreed, warming to the kind-eyed boy. He spoke English well, but Scylla could tell it wasn't his first language. His accent was hard to pin down, though. "And you? You are what your people call necro, yes?" Adil asked innocently enough, but Scylla felt her heart leap into her throat at the question. Adil, Scylla is a civilian," Tally answered for her, saving Scylla the trouble. She noticed the slight tilt of Adil's head and the wavering of his smile, but he recovered quickly and said, "Apologies. My mistake." Scylla let it slide, but she held a deep unease around the male witch for the rest of the afternoon while the three of them worked in the garden. It was good to have her hands in the dirt. She felt connected to the earth again, in a way she hadn't since leaving her studies at War College. Scylla's parents had supported themselves with various cash-in-hand jobs all over the country, including farming and fruit picking, particularly in the session. Both were necro, so they had been drawn to jobs working the land, and Scylla had helped out in her younger days. Working with her hands again felt good. Scylla could almost fool herself into believing there was a place for her at Iron Mountain, among Rael and her friends, but that was a pipe dream. A military complex run by Sarah Alder herself was possibly the most dangerous place in the world for Scylla. She was a deserter, and a member of the spree to boot. She would rot in a cell if Alder ever found out. Scylla had been lucky so far, but she wasn't stupid enough to think that luck could hold out. The other Necros working in the garden were all older than her, and Scylla didn't recognize any of them from Fort Salem. Rael had mentioned a lot of witches their age died at the fall of Fort Salem, particularly the Necros who tried to stem the tide of oncoming freakers once the protection wards fell, but it didn't mean much when it would only take one person to recognize her. Talia unclipped her radio from her belt as it beeped 3 times. The bellwether unit had come up with a signal to check if the others was free to talk when one of them called. Tally brought the radio up to her mouth as she pushed the button. "Go for Craven!" "Tally, can you take Collar her dinner tray? I'm picking up Callie from school and having dinner with her and Adil. I'll owe you one." "Over." Abigail's voice crackled on the other end of the radio. "Can do. Craven out. Over." Scylla, who was only a few feet away and had overheard the conversation, spoke up. "I can take it for you, if you want." If Rael was awake and up to eating, then she'd surely be up to see visitors. Tally brightened at the suggestion. "Sure, that's a great idea. I'm sure she'll be happy to see you. We can go wash up and I'll take you to the cafeteria." Lying in her bunk back in the dorm, she shared with the unit. Rael could barely keep her eyes open. She was exhausted, the transition having taken it out of her. Her headache was gone and she felt marginally more human, but it would be days until she returned to her full strength. Rael was kicking herself for what happened earlier with Scylla. She was trying to get the other girl to stay and she'd freaked out on her. Scylla probably wouldn't ever speak to her again. And that was if she hadn't already left while Rael was out of it. There was a bang at the door and Rael sat up with a frown. None of her friends, or her superiors, would ever bother knocking. She rose slowly, her body aching all over, and shuffled over to the door. When she opened it, and she found Scylla standing outside, holding 2 dinner trays. They locked eyes, and there was an awkward moment of silence until Scylla said, "Sorry, I had to kick the door, but I come bearing gifts. Hungry?" Scylla broke out of her trademark smirk as Rael answered with a grin and stepped aside to let her in. "I'm starved. You can just put it on the bed. Thanks." Scylla did as she was asked and placed one of the dinner trays on Rael's bunk. She placed the other on the small desk opposite Rael's bed and sat in the seat beside it, keeping her distance from the other girl. Despite being hungry, Rael left a tray of food beside her, keeping her attention on Rael. I'm sorry about what happened. You probably have questions." Rael toyed with the gold ring on her right index finger as she waited for a response. "Some," Scylla nodded, looking every bit as anxious as Rael felt. "Tally filled me in on some of it? Who did you heal to get infected?" Rael ran her tongue over her lips and glanced down at the ground before answering. "Alder." Even from all the way across the room, Rael heard Scylla's soft gasp. She looked up and found the other girl looking at her incredulously. "Sarah Alder? The woman who enslaved all of which kind?" Scylla felt a white-hot anger burning up inside her. Her parents were dead because of Alder and her accord. "You should have let her die, Rael." "You can't mean that." Rael shook her head. She wasn't sure where any of this was coming from. Sure, Scylla had spoken of her dislike of Alder, but there was a huge line between disliking someone and actively wishing them dead. "I do. How many witches have died because of her?" "How many have lived?" Rael shot back. She was far from Alder's biggest fan, but she recognized Alder and her accord with the people of Salem had been the lesser of 2 evils. "She's no saint, but Alder saved my kind from persecution and being wiped out at the hands of the Camarilla." Rael and her unit had had their run-ins with Alder in Basic, but that didn't mean she wanted to see the other woman dead. Whatever her thoughts on Alder had been before the fall of Fort Salem, Rael had set those aside in the aftermath, when she risked her own life to save the older woman's. "I didn't think about it, about what she's done or who it cost. I'm a fixer. It's what I do." Scylla let out a hollow laugh, her smile not reaching her eyes. "Do you make a habit of saving people you don't like? People who don't deserve it?" Rael shrugged. The conversation hadn't gone the way she expected. "I would do the same for anyone." Even spree. Enough lives have been lost without letting more folks die when they don't need to. Scylla fell quiet, taking in Rael's admission. She was a better person than Scylla was, though, given Scylla's past, the bar wasn't all that high. Do you think the spree still exist? Scylla asked, steering the conversation away from Alder. Rael didn't answer right away. She took a moment to think before shrugging. Some of them are probably still out there, but it's not like conscription is really a thing anymore. There are so few of us left. The military has better things to do than to chase down dodgers and throw them into prison. Or kill them, Scylla muttered under her breath. Their parents hadn't been given the option of imprisonment. They were peaceful people, and they hadn't fought back when the military police caught up with them, when they murdered Scylla's parents in cold blood. Do you think there are any spree on the base? Scylla asked. Probably, Rael shrugged, grateful for the change of topic. It's not like we could identify them before the world went to hell. If they're here, they're keeping a low profile. Would it bother you if there were spree here? Scylla probed. Rael seemed apathetic whenever she mentioned them, and Scylla was interested in seeing where his sympathies lay. Rael shrugged again. Some of them did terrible things, but then so did the military. It's two sides of the same coin, and there's been casualties on either side. I mean, if I found out someone was spree, I wouldn't kick them out or anything. Rael stared at the ring as she twirled it on her finger. Enough folks have died already. I don't think Alder would feel the same way, though. Few people would, Scylla agreed. You're special. The way you think, the way you act, protecting people who don't give a damn about you. You're something else, soldier girl. Rael blushed, her cheeks growing hot under Scylla's scrutiny. She shook her head. I don't think so. Maybe it's because I'm a fixer, or just the way my mama raised me, but I see the value in all life. Rael bit the inside of her cheek before saying what came next. I am not sure what I'd do if I ever came face to face with the spree member who killed my mom. But Alder and Petra Bellwether are just as responsible for it happening. I had the chance to let Alder die, and General Bellwether's daughter too, but I didn't. An eye for an eye and the whole world goes blind. It was something her mother had instilled in her growing up, but Rael had only really come to understand its true meaning since the world had gone to shit. Scylla picked up her dinner tray and joined Rael on the bunk, taking a seat beside the other girl. The older tension vanished in a blink of an eye as her shoulder brushed against Rael's. The blonde picked up her own tray, her appetite making a reappearance. They ate together, comfortable in each other's company, while Rael talked about growing up in the session. We were dirt poor, but happy, she grinned, her smile lighting up her entire face. Scylla liked Rael's smile, and her eyes, and her hands, and her kindness, and everything else about the other girl. Their empty trays sat on the floor, as the two girls lay facing one another on Rael's bunk. Rael telling Scylla more about her family. Pops was a mechanic. He used to teach me stuff all the time, so I work in the auto shop when I'm not on watch or out scavenging. So does that mean you're good with your hands? Scylla asked, a spark of mischief in her eyes as she took one of Rael's hands in her own, linking their fingers together. I'm very good, Rael laughed. But then she dropped her gaze to their entwined hands, and her grin faltered. I could have shown you, if that damn horde hadn't shown up. Scylla shifted, bringing them closer as she ran the pad of her thumb over the back of the other girl's hand. What's it like when you turn? Rael was quiet for a long moment, and Scylla feared she'd overstepped the mark. Finally, Rael said, when it happens, all that matters is the horde. Getting to it, being a part of it, it's hard to explain. It's like I'm awake, but I'm not in control of my own body. I can't stop myself. That sounds horrible. Do you think every freak feels like that? Across from Scylla, Rael bristled, and the other girl realized her mistake immediately. Fuck, Ray, I'm sorry. I meant infected. I know you're not a freak. I don't think of you like that. Rael forgave her for the slip of tongue. She turned to lie on her back, staring up at the fairy lights as she clucked her tongue. I don't know. Maybe the freakers really are empty, not conscious like me. That's what I hope anyway. You're so sweet, said Scylla, and she meant it. Even with every reason in the world to be bitter and full of hate, Rael Collar wore her heart on her sleeve. Propped up on her elbow, she leaned over the other witch and kissed her. It started out slow. Scylla was cautious to keep most of her weight off the other girl, as if Rael was made of glass and might shatter at the slightest touch. While Rael arched into Scylla, desperate to feel Scylla's body flush against her own. Scylla pulled away first, her bottom lip tucked between her teeth. Is this okay? It's great, Rael answered with a breathless laugh. Scylla rolled her eyes, placing a hand to her chest to push her back down as Rael reached up to kiss her again. I meant, are you okay to do this? Physically? I'm fine, Rael insisted, right before she broke out in a face-splitting yawn. She gave Scylla a sheepish apology. Sorry, guess I'm a little tired. Do you want me to go? No, I... Stay. Just for a little bit. Sure, Scylla grinned, and Rael shifted to straddle the other girl, pushing her down onto her back like she'd done earlier in the day, before they'd been interrupted. Rael might have been too tired to pick up from where they left off, but that didn't mean they couldn't keep making out for a while longer. Scylla was happy to oblige, eager to make the most of the time she had left with Rael. Scylla would be gone by morning.
Please find the fanfiction you just listened to on Archive of Our Own and leave the author some love. Without them, this wouldn't be possible, and we want to thank them from the bottoms of our hearts for creating these amazing stories and keeping the show alive.